Right, to start with today, that Hydesville Day was on Friday, which was the 31st of March, and that's where 175 years of modern spiritualism was celebrated. So for those of you who are here today, perhaps for the first time, we're just going to give you a brief overview of what it means, if that's okay. So I'm just going to read a small snippet to you. So Hydesville was a typical little hamlet in the New York state with a primitive population, which was no doubt half educated, but was probably like the rest of the small American centers of life, more detached from prejudice and more receptive to new ideas than any other set of people of that time. Hydesville, situated about 20 miles from the rising town of Rochester, consisted of a cluster of wooden houses of a very humble type. It was one of those a residence which would far be the most important that America had given to the world. It was inhabited by a decent farmer family of the name of Fox. Beside Mr. John Fox and his wife Margaret, there were two children resident in the house at the time when the manifestations reached such a point of intensity that they attracted general attention. These children were the daughters, Margaret, aged 14, and Kate, aged 11. They had several other children, of whom only one, Leah, was teaching music. Need to come into this narrative. We can start at the time of the tenancy when the Fox family took over the house on December the 11th, 1847. It was not until that year, the next year, that the sounds were heard by the previous tenants begun once more. These sounds consisted of rapping noises. A rap would seem not to be an unnatural sound to visitors when they opened the door for them. We know that spirit of a peddler was trying to communicate with the two daughters by using a simple rapping code, using the letters of the alphabet by knocking once for A, twice for B, and so on, so as to prove his identity, how he would have been murdered by the previous tenant, and where his body could be found. These communications with the peddler proved to the world by the process of mediumship, three things could be established. Number one, that the use of code provided evidence. Number two, that some people were naturally mediums. And number three, the communication was possible. So we'd like to thank, won't we, the spirit world, because as we know, spiritualism was around before this time. But isn't it lovely that this was the time for them, our loved ones, and those who guide us, to bring it into the mainstream, to show that life does indeed live on. And isn't it lovely that, as we know, the intelligence of the spirit world, that they chose something quite simple, rappings. They didn't choose, did they, to manifest themselves and show themselves, but the peddler wanted to show where he was, and that they developed this code. And isn't that lovely that the whole world at this time was then interested? For some, I expect, even today, they couldn't get their heads around it. But for those of us who are spiritualists, who are sensitive, isn't it lovely to know that that's how the spirit world wanted to come back into the world? Because we know they were there in biblical times. But isn't it lovely to say, we're here and let's work together? And how then it went on in the 1900s to progress. And that's where we saw some of our best mediums ever. And today we're still really playing up. And this could be due to a number of factors. Back then, they didn't have the technology that we have. Back then, they were more disciplined. They were actually, they would study more, wouldn't they? And they would not think about not sitting in circle for long periods of time. As today, we have so much to do in this world, don't we? And how many of us have to fit in our lovely world that we know to be the spirit world around our earthly life? So if we take away all your mobiles and communication today, do we think that our connection would be stronger again? And I mean this in the sense of stronger in the physicalness of trance, manifestation, spirits showing themselves. It's just a thought, and it's only my opinion, but I want to put out there to you all, where has that all gone? Now, I know you're one of these lovely centres who still bring the lovely world of trance in, but a lot of UK churches, it's not recognised anymore. So thank you to your inspirers and your leaders for bringing that magical world in. And isn't it lovely to be able not only to connect with our loved ones, but to our inspirers, and how those inspirers blow us away with their information. The instrument relaxing down and allowing their inspirers to address the audience. And isn't it lovely that proof is here again? That proof to show that it's not the medium, because the inspirer comes through with such knowledge, sometimes reverence. But isn't it lovely to see when we witness it, there is a difference? The instrument, meaning the medium, would never speak like that. And yet there the inspirer comes through and it touches our hearts and souls. And isn't it lovely that we are open channels for this, that we can receive that wisdom and that knowledge? And isn't it lovely that during this period, our lovely mediums, our pioneers who have gone before us, brought what we do today into the mainstream? They filled the theatres, didn't they? They actually brought that love and that peace to families who had lost their loved ones in the world wars. And isn't it lovely that some of the mediums put their neck on the lines, and one in particular was the last medium to be prosecuted under the Witchcraft Act. As we know, though, it wasn't witchcraft. She was doing her job, wasn't she? She was bringing that comfort and that proof of survival from those who have departed to their loved ones. So isn't it lovely that even then we had light workers? And because we have to remember back then, sometimes they couldn't worship like we do today. Sometimes it had to be, didn't it, in a darkened room where it was invite only. And in some places it was illegal to worship. So isn't it lovely that they still continued? They still continue to bring that message. So we thank our pioneers, and I hope you all enjoyed remembering Hydesville Day if you went out for celebrations. But I was inspired today just to give you an oversight of why our churches and centres are here today. So going back to our lovely readings today from Barbara, isn't it so true that people come into our lives for a reason, a season and a lifetime? But isn't it hard when we want that person for more than a season? And yet they come in and they go. And as Sharon said today, in our line of work, we do meet people and it's almost as though they are here to help us, but then they move on, or we move on. And isn't it upsetting for us who are sensitive sometimes to have that person leave our lives? Sometimes there's no explanation, but we have to be assured that they've come in and met their purpose, or where we've had to walk away from people in life. If we look at it in a spiritual sense, we have to remember perhaps we were there to help them, to give them something that they were looking for. But we also today celebrate those people who remain in our world, in our lives for a lifetime. Isn't it beautiful that sometimes we all say we have our soulmate? But this doesn't have to be, does it, a partner? This can just be a friend. For some of you, it's the animal kingdom. For some of you, I met the other day, and they still say to me, that's why I prefer pets and animals, because they're not as awkward as human beings. So it's very true, isn't it? But we have to remember that that pet is only here for a short time. If we use a dog, for example, in their life, they're here, aren't they, for could be 100 years, but they're only with us, say, for 10. But isn't it lovely that we then get inspired to go and choose another friend? And this can be, can't it, from a puppy? But there's so many of us who like to go to charities, isn't it? And rescue and give someone that home. And this is where our compassion comes in, doesn't it? But we have to push through that, and we have to be compassionate about people. Because today, one of the readings said, we don't know what goes on behind someone's closed door, do we? So we have to remember sometimes that people perhaps are being awkward for a reason. But isn't it a job as us, as healers, to break down those barriers, to say, we're not here to invade your privacy, but we're here to listen and to help. And sometimes in our world, that's all we need, isn't it? Just having someone to listen and to help. And the main reason for our being, I believe, is not to judge. And it's very hard not to, isn't it? Because how many of us have been judged in our lives? And I love today that the weather pays no attention to criticism. If only we could do that. That naughty weather, how many times has it ruined something for us? How many times have we planned a picnic, a barbecue? This is mainly in England, by the way, and it rains. So you just can't plan even in the hot times. But again, could this be because we're not treating Mother Earth and give her the respect that she deserves? That's just a thought for you all. Why has the world changed? Why do we get this weather system that we're getting? But we have to embrace, don't we, when the sun does shine. And sometimes it's mostly, isn't it, for us, is when it's in impromptu. Someone rings up and said, do you fancy doing this today? And the sun's shining. And isn't that lovely? But for some of us, it takes us out of our comfort zones, doesn't it? Oh, I couldn't possibly do that. I haven't planned for it. But it's about having that someone to say, live a little, go and do it. And how many of us have done it and really enjoyed ourselves? And yet when we've planned for that cookout or that pick, we haven't enjoyed it as much. So I'm going to leave that thought with you today. Perhaps we need to be more flexible and perhaps not expect too much of ourselves. And it's so important that we don't compare ourselves to others. How many of us have done that on our journeys and we've ended up feeling more unhappy because we can't meet the expectation that we want to be when really we're enough for ourselves. Thank you.